Now I'm going to introduce our speaker, and Dr. Andy Kratter. Andy is the Avian Collections Manager and of the Ornithology Division at the Florida Museum of Natural History. Along with co-compiler Bob Carroll, he has compiled the John Hintermeister Gainesville Christmas bird count since 2016. He's the secretary of the Florida Ornithological Society Records Committee. He's also a member of both the ABA Checklist Committee and the American Ornithological Society North American Classification Committee. And if you've seen the most recent newsletter, Alachua Audubon's newsletter for January, February, Andy's article about the Gainesville Christmas bird count is in that newsletter, as well as several other articles about the local Christmas bird counts. So we're really fortunate to have someone of Andy's caliber, a member of our local birding community, and also the co-compiler of our Gainesville Christmas bird count. So I'm going to turn this over to Andy. Andy, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Thanks for the great introduction, and it's a real treat to be able to talk to all of you. I can see your names and some of your faces, and I wish I could see you in person, but they're not going to let us do that right yet. Pretty soon, I hope. I'm going to share my screen now. All right, does that look good?
Looks great.
I'll have to answer that myself. Okay, so the title of my talk is How the John Hintermeister Gainesville Christmas Bird Count Became a National Champion. And I put this talk together for the celebration of John's life that happened at the Prairie Creek Lodge not too long after he passed away, unfortunately. But it kind of evolved. I was a compiler of the count then, but this talk has kind of evolved as I've gotten more involved in the Gainesville Christmas bird count. Okay, so first I'm going to go over some recent accomplishments. I called the Gainesville, the John Hintermeister count a national champion. And why do I call it a national champion? Well, let's look at some of these accomplishments. In 2018 and 19, we were the highest count in Florida in terms of species numbers, 175 and 172 respectively in those 2 years. We had in 2018, we had 16 national high counts for species. This was the most of any count in the US. So for 16 species in all the US, we had the highest count for that species. In 2018 and 19, we had the highest inland count in all the US. In 2018, when we had 175 species, that was only the third inland count ever to top 175 species. Alaska and in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas has had up to 195 species. So we got a ways to go to beat that record, but I think we could do it. 2018, we smashed the all-time record for limpkins. As you know, we went through this huge boom of limpkins when the apple snails reached the Paynes Prairie. That year we had 545. The previous high ever in all the Christmas bird counts was 235, so more than doubled that. And for the 2019, which we just got the results for, we set the all-time high national record for pileated woodpeckers with 195, and for snail kites, another one of these apple snail species. So these are great accomplishments. We should all be proud, all of the people that participate in this count. So what makes it count? Since 1973, I participated in my first one on the Crystal Springs bird count south of San Francisco, which usually is up around 180, 190 species. It was a great count, and it kind of brought, I just got excited about Christmas bird counts, and I've been doing them wherever I've lived ever since, in Louisiana, here in Gainesville, and in different places in California. So what makes a good count? First, you need the birds, of course. This is a Christmas bird count. Second, you need a huge group of people. The more people, the merrier, pretty much, for Christmas bird counts. And then you can start covering the circle really well and getting some of these national highs. And then really what's super important is to have good leadership. And I have the picture here of John Hintermeister, who took over the count in 1972. The count started in 57, but it had been kind of a small affair until John got his hands on it and has really morphed it into what it is today, this really well-organized, well-led Christmas bird count. So here's the number of species recorded. I'm going to have a lot of graphs like this in that show on the x-axis is just the year, the Christmas bird count. Year 100 of the Christmas bird count was in year 101 was in year 2000. And then on the left is the number of species. So as you can see, it started as a rather small affair and it's just grown until here we are up at 2020. So what brings the birds to our little 15-mile diameter circle here in Gainesville? We have great habitat diversity. This is always one of the most important things for increasing diversity within an area. What's amazing when you compare us to other counts is we don't have any salt water. We don't have any beaches. We don't have bays. We're not getting a huge share of Florida birds just because we don't have these habitats. So that limits us in a lot of ways, but it makes all these areas, all these other factors really make up for it. We have a great system of protected areas, state parks like Paynes Prairie, county parks, Prairie Creek or Tuscaloosa, city parks like Morningside or Depot Park or Boulder Springs, and of course, also managed by the city is Sweetwater Wetlands, which is, as everybody knows, phenomenal. Whoops. Uh-oh. I got to go back. Okay, so when Sweetwater Wetlands was built with by Bob Knight, and Debbie really helped in the design of this in the mid-2010s, or early to mid-2010s, it brought this kind of stable wetland environment to Florida. Before we had the prairie, but the prairie was all over the place and how wet it was. So some years it had a great number of ducks, some years it was dried up, had a great number of cranes, but it never really had a stable core. And that's what Sweetwater Wetlands provides. And birds like purple gallinule, least-bittern, snailkite, limpkin, gray-headed swamphen, and roseate spoonbill have all become regular on our counts when these birds were rare or absent before Sweetwater Wetlands was built. So looking at the people, that circle of the people, what do they bring to a Christmas bird count? So in 57, the first year of the count, there were 6 participants. They had spent 16 party hours in the field and recorded 74 species. But they had a couple cool birds. They had red-cockaded woodpecker, which hasn't been recorded in the county since the early 90s. They had 10 Bachman sparrows, which went absent except for the last couple of years for the Gainesville count. So we're finally reclaiming those as some of the longleaf habitats have been restored and they're starting to mature. Maybe we'll get RCWs back at some point. That would be great. Compare that to 2020, this last year that we had 126 participants with 350 party hours and 162 species. So part of the explanation for why we have such high numbers and high diversity is just we have more participants and they spend more time in the field. But the people that the Gainesville area tracks are not just your run-of-the-mill ordinary Floridians. We have Of course, we have the University of Florida here. We have a lot of ornithologists associated with UF. I think UF is probably one of the most saturated ornithologist habitats in the country. There's just all sorts of professors, and they attract all sorts of grad students and all sorts of undergrads, and it's just a kind of a beehive of ornithological activity. We have offices of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Florida Wildlife Commission. We've had legions of good birders that aren't associated with either UF or any of these agencies. And before COVID, we had great compilations. And I'm not sure exactly when these started, but I'm sure almost all of you have been to the Life South compilations where we get together. And this has been kind of a social highlight of the birding year, especially for me. I just love getting together with everybody after a hard day of birding and see how we did on the count. And putting these in more in quantifying this effort, this is the same kind of graph with the year of the count on the bottom of the graph on the x-axis. And you can see the number of participants has grown slowly. And then orange is the party hours. And that has grown quite a bit. I think there was a mistake in the entering for the year in, I think it was 2008 or something like that. And well, most of my graphs have changed this because I think that was just a entering mistake. Every count has a compiler or co-compilers, and we've gone through a few of them in the 60 years that we've had the count. Mary Sherwood was the first. She did it for 4 years. Oliver Austin, the curator at the Florida Museum of Ornithology, was from 62 to 70. And Al Stickley at the Fish and Wildlife Service was at 1 year. And then in 1972, this is when the Gainesville count really changed. And John Hintermeister, he was associated with Sears Roebuck at the time. That's where he worked. He pretty much changed how he did the count. He broke the count up into sections. He assigned like a team captain for that section to recruit. We started doing things like scouting for birds. It just was a more systematic, more thorough census than had ever been done before. John let Barbara Muschlitz and Craig Parenteau take over from 82 to 2001. And then in 2002, he teamed up with Howard Adams, and John and Howard ran it for 13 years. And then Bob Carroll and I took over in 2016 and have done it ever since. And so this is a map of what I call the Hintermeister effect. When John in 1972 first joined the count here, we were having about 125 species. That was a good count for the Christmas bird count. And it went all the way up to almost 150 really quickly. We had a few down years, and then Barbara and Craig took over. And then John, 2002, and then you saw this other period of growth until he retired from the count in 2015. So you can see this is a great bit of Christmas bird count success was during these Hintermeister years. I'm going to see if I... Okay, and then the last thing that makes a good count, and it was really changed in the last little while, is technology. And before, people might have pished for birds, but now we all go out. A lot of us have smartphones. We have mobbing calls of screech owls and chickadees, titmice on our phones. We play those, and those attract all sorts of birds to the playback of the calls. So this has been a big help in attracting birds while you're out in the field. eBird has been a tremendous force in birding. It helps us scout, helps us kind of like brings us all together in the virtual world, and we can find out what birds, we know where all the birds are even before we count them pretty much. So this has been a tremendous resource track of what birds we've been seeing, but also helping us plan for the Christmas bird count. Digital photos are a tremendous resource for documenting rarities. Before, if people saw a rare bird, they would write a description, but they sometimes weren't accepted by the compilers or by the Florida compilers because the descriptions weren't that good or they didn't get a good enough look. Now people are getting photos of almost every rare bird. And like on recent count, Ted Greenwald took a picture of a Tennessee warbler. He kind of thought it was when he told me about it. And then when we looked at the photos, it sure enough was. And this is a nice rare bird in the last Christmas bird count. This penguin, I don't think was on the Christmas bird count here though. Airboats is, most of you probably have the same attitude about airboats as I do, and that you can't stand them, but they sure are a help for counting birds on Payne's Prairie, almost all of which is inaccessible when it's wet. And so the inner parts of Payne's Prairie, where there's thousands and thousands of ducks, you might see something like this flock of shorebirds that Jonathan Mays took a photo of during the count in 2019. And that photo has Dunlin, short-billed or long-billed dowitchers, and stilt sandpipers all in it. We didn't even know stilt sandpiper was seen on the count until Jonathan looked at those photos. So airboats have definitely been a positive tool for us to use out on the prairie. And here, we've been getting out on Noonan's Lake on pelagic trips with the help of various boat owners such as Bob Knight and Debbie have let us use their boat. Ted Greenwald has been our captain, and Mary Ellen. And then this, I don't know who this guy with the mittens is. I've seen him around on the web lately, but he helps us count birds out there every year. Okay, so that's kind of the history of the count. Let's go into the results. Okay, 2020 was a good year, a really good year, especially considering what we have all been through with the COVID pandemic and just general turmoil that was the whole 2020. We had 162 species. That's the fourth highest of all time, tied with the counts in 2015 and 2012. We got some good birds like purple finch, 20 of them. They were scattered all over. They're even more common now in the, more widespread now in the city. Ted Greenwald and Mary Ellen and I were on and Bernie were out on the boat, and we had a brown pelican fly up and just land right next to us. This is only the third time I think it's been seen on the count. This is kind of shows, you know, brown pelican, one of the most iconic Florida birds probably, but not inland. You don't see them inland. And so this is a really good bird to see. Gray-headed swamp hen at Sweetwater was another very good species to add. Robinson and Miguel Ponce found a western kingbird at on campus right across from the museums there next to the Orthopedic Institute. I mentioned the Tennessee warbler photographed by Ted. And then, of course, snail kites are all over the prairie. This is still only the third year I think we've ever had snail kites on the count. Another cool part of the count in 2020 was we had the highest number of individual birds we've ever had. We had 77,500 or so birds. The previous high was 72,000. That's way back in '97. This is probably a result of good coverage of the prairie and the rather wet conditions on the prairie. Not too wet, not too dry, but just perfect for things like black-bellied whistling ducks, sand-hill cranes, coots, and then a large number of blackbirds come and roost in the marshes on Payne's Prairie at night. So we got huge numbers of grackles and red-winged blackbirds. It's been a good early winter for robins, and then we had a huge number of tree swallows. Almost all of these were on Noonan's Lake, foraging low over the water early in the morning. In 2020, this year, we set all-time highs for the Gainesville count, the highest number we have ever had on this count, for 28 birds, 28 species, which is an amazing number. For the 6 or 5 species that are highlighted in yellow, we almost doubled or more than doubled the previous high counts. So for the blue-winged teal ringneck duck, you see we went from a couple thousand up to 8,000 ringneck ducks, almost doubled the number of purple gallinules ever recorded. Same for summer tanager, and most special was Baltimore Orioles. We went from a high of 72, which was several years ago, and now the new count this year was 120. 4 of these all-time highs were woodpeckers, which is pretty amazing. I'm not sure exactly what would lead to such high numbers of woodpeckers, but that's what happened this year. Red-bellied, downy, and pileated, and yellow-bellied sapsucker all had the high counts for Gainesville this year. And like I said, Orioles, with the feeding of Orioles, with jelly feeders around and people and through Bubba Scales and Wild Birds Incorporated, we've really broadened our network of feeding, especially Orioles at backyard feeders, and they're now in contact with the Christmas bird count. And 120 is just an amazing number of Baltimore Orioles for this count. We had the high national count was 72. I can't quite read was in 2006. So we almost doubled that. And so this is certainly going to be a new national record for Baltimore Orioles on the Christmas bird count. This is a neat Oriole at my feeder. This bottom one is almost a reddish orange. You can see the normal color up on the one above. He's been coming to the feeder almost every day for a brief snack of jelly. We had 126 participants this year on 356 party hours. There's Bernie again. I'm not sure what he's doing there. This is the tied for the highest ever number of participants, and it was the most ever party hours. So despite the COVID pandemic, despite everything we went through, we just had great participation, including these 2 characters. 3 characters. Okay, it wasn't all great news on the count. Every year we miss species that we expect to get. And so what happened in 2020? In 2018, we had 175 species, so we had 13 fewer. What did we miss this year? And one of the things was sparrows. We had 0 Lincolns, 0 fox, and 0 white-crowned sparrows. And especially white-crowned, we usually get maybe a Lincoln's or 2 or fox or 2, but we often get quite a number of white-crowned, and we had 56 in 2011. This year we had 0. And looking at another sparrow, this is white-throated sparrow, which used to be fairly common. In 1976, we had over 400 here on the Gainesville count. This year we had, I think it was like 10 or something like that. It was some dismally low number. And what's happening probably, this might be a climate change problem, is in that white-throated sparrows are wintering further north and they get pushed down by cold weather. But if it doesn't get very cold, they're just not pushed very far south anymore. We miss a few open water birds. Snow goose is not really an open water bird. It's often seen in pastures, but I kind of threw it in here. Red-breasted merganser is often seen on Noonan's Lake or Lake Warbler. Common goldeneye is often seen on the small ponds, like at the post office or right behind the Museum of Natural History on Hull Road. On herring gull, we've gotten every year out at Nunes Lake, except this past year. So I'm not sure what's going on there. And then what else we missed? We didn't have a huge number of rarities. In 2018, these are birds that are seen very infrequently on counts. We had 25 of them, and that year we saw 175 species, but we only had 15 this year. And like in last year, when we had 18 of these rare birds, we had say the brown-crested flycatcher out on Payne's Prairie was, these type of birds didn't show up this year quite as much. One of the great things you can do with Christmas bird count data is you can track populations. And tracking populations is something that's kind of hard to do, but with the Christmas bird count, you have a continental data, a continental scale data set that's taken in 15-mile diameter circles, over 1,500 in just in North America of these circles. The data is a little sloppy. There's a lot of noise, but with so much effort, you get a pretty good signal. One great thing about the Gainesville count is that we've been doing it the same way. The same sections, the same areas are counted every year. We've been having increased participation and party hours, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But generally, the count is pretty much done the same way. So that gives us a great data set to look at tracking the populations of wintering birds in the north central Florida. And again, here's I'll explain this graphic again. On the bottom is the Christmas bird count year, and it starts in 1957 and goes to 2020. And number of individuals is on the left. So this is a yellow-throated warbler, fairly common. There's usually one in almost every mixed species flock. And this is just the number of birds increasing over time, every year since we've been doing the count. Okay, but if you look at the number of party hours, this is the effort. That's the graph on the right. And then you look at the yellow-throated warbler on the left. You see that they have a very similar upward trajectory. So maybe only all the yellow-throated warblers that we're seeing it's not really increasing in the Gainesville area in winter. It's only that we're just increasing the effort. So what we do with data like this is we correct for effort, and you divide the number of yellow-throated warblers by the number of party hours for that year. And if you look at that graph, that's this right graph, and compare it to the left graph, which is just the individuals, you'll see that actually yellow-throated warblers in general are not increasing. They're actually, since about the mid-70s, have been very, very stable, pretty even number of count with a little bit of increase toward the last few years. The early years of the Christmas bird count and all these data sets, they tend to have not that many participants, and they were done in quite different ways from year to year. And so the data is a little bit more noisy when you look at these. But the data, starting about in the mid-70s, this data starts getting a lot better. Let's look at a couple more common birds. Here's the tufted titmouse. Here's the number of individuals. Again, I'm showing this graph just to show you again this, what happens when you correct for effort. That's just the individuals. And then the graph on the right here is if you correct for effort. You see how much noise? I don't know if this is noise or just year-to-year fluctuation. There's quite a bit of fluctuation from year to year in our number of titmice. You see it looked like there was an increased number of titmice through about year 2000, and then it's kind of tailed off. The increase is very slight now, and we kind of stabilize around this mean number of about 1.4 birds per party hour. Here's another popular bird in mixed flocks, the chickadee. I would expect, if all of this was an effect of people changing from just pitching to using speakers and using smartphones and using owl calls, the increase of that, I would expect the titmouse and the chickadee to have a similar pattern, but you can see in this case, it's kind of different. They had a pretty even number of birds for up until about 2000. And then just in the last 20 years, it's really starting to get higher and higher and higher. So this might be a case where using the owl calls and the smartphones and things like this have really increased the number of chickadees. They might be more responsive to it than the titmice, or it could be some changes in the habitat or changes of our coverage. It's really hard to tease all these apart. Okay, and then we have some birds that are just crazy, like black-bellied whistling ducks. Black-bellied whistling ducks were rare in almost all of Florida until the mid-90s, and then they reached Gainesville around the year 2000, and then they've just gone through the roof. And this is kind of an urban adapter, along with sweetwater wetlands, provides the foraging and roosting, and their numbers are just, this is even correcting for effort. You see, they're just gone through the roof. Okay, so it hasn't all been increases, unfortunately. There's been a number of species that are on hard declines. The first one, I mentioned before how we've got great numbers of woodpeckers lately, but the northern flicker has not been doing very well. It used to be the most common wintering woodpecker in the Gainesville area. Now it's by far, it's not anywhere close to pileated, to downy, to red-bellied, or to sapsucker, or even red-headed. And you see the numbers have just kind of been plummeting down, down, down. And the reasons for the decline in flickers is not really well known, but it certainly matches the kestrel, and it probably has a lot to do with what's happening on their breeding grounds, where they're not changes in agricultural practices have had and removing snags and things like this have been having a devastating effect. Common ground dove is another open country bird that used to be really quite common in the Gainesville area, and now we're lucky if we pick up a couple of them. This decline happened mainly before the year 2000, and we've just been kind of humming along at about 10 birds per count ever since. The shrike population nationwide, continent-wide, has crashed. This has been looked at in a number of different ways. Part of it is habitat changes, as old field farms and stuff have grown up into forest over most of eastern North America. Gainesville, a lot of the habitat, they like open country, not super heavy agriculture. A lot of that type of habitat in the Gainesville area has been turned into housing developments, Butler Plaza, places like this. And the number, this is matching the continental trend where the numbers are plummeting. And bobwhite, even though people like to hunt bobwhite and they're managed, forests are managed extensively for them, they're still not doing very well. Used to get quite a few of them, especially around the border of Payne's Prairie. You would think with management and restoration of longleaf pine forest that they would be doing a bit better, but this restoration is not happening on a large enough scale for the bobwhite populations to rebound, at least not yet. And then things like fire ants affect ground nesters. They invade the nest of both bobwhite and common ground dove, which is showing the same pattern. So in summary, the Gainesville John Hintermeister Christmas bird count, we really excel at a national level. I think a lot of people we've kind of caught the attention with the number of national highs we've had, with how well we do with as an inland count. And my duty and Bob's duty, I think we both look at it as like, we got to keep going. We got to keep making it better, keep up the great numbers. And this is just, it's a phenomenal count. and keep up with the great traditions like can't wait to get back to our in-person compilation. We have, people retire or they move on, especially for a university town, grad students move away, but new ones come in, and it's great to see the new blood, the new students that are coming in, even younger teenagers and stuff are starting to bird more. Scott Robinson, Jessica Burnett, and I are trying to get together a data set that's looking at the Gainesville count and using looking at the numbers and tracking the populations through time. So we're hoping to get something out on this in probably the Florida Field Naturalist. And in the future, I don't think 175 species is enough. I want to see 180 or 195. I put these 4 species on the bottom because they're 4 species that would be new for Florida, but all 4 are kind of expected in the Gulf Coast at some time or another. Actually, Hermit Warbler was found last winter in South Florida, so that one wouldn't be a new state record. But Lucy's Warbler on the left, then Painted Redstart, Hermit Warbler, and then Dusky Cap Flycatcher. So I think all of us should be looking for these birds on the 122nd Christmas bird count, which will happen on December, I think it's 19th. It's this Sunday, December 19th of 2021. So I look forward to seeing all of you out there. I want to thank the Alachua Audubon, who has been sponsoring the Gainesville John Hintermeister Christmas bird count for 61 years. I want to thank Rex. He did an article about the 50th anniversary in the AAS newsletter. And I gleaned a lot of information about the count from that article that Rex wrote. And especially all the great birders and photographers in Gainesville. This is a phenomenal place to be a birder. It's a phenomenal place to be an ornithologist. It's a phenomenal place to be a conservationist. I look forward to 2021 being a much more social year. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share. I haven't been keeping up with the chat. Okay, and Trina reminds us that the Pileated Woodpecker was the ABA Bird of the Year. The American Birding Association on January 1st selects a Bird of the Year from North America, and this year it was the Pileated Woodpecker. So we're at the center of Pileated Woodpecker heaven here, the highest number of any bird count in all of North America. So that's excellent. And a couple things about Bernie, of course, and Felicia's asking about pine siskin, but I'm not sure what. We missed pine siskin somehow on the count. I had one on count week, which doesn't count toward the total. So if there's are any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Just type them in the chat box. Thank you very much for paying attention. Thank you for participating in the Christmas bird count. It's been a wonderful opportunity for me and Bob to compile this count, and we look forward to many, many, many more years, and look forward to seeing you out there in the field and on the count, and without gloves and masks and whatever crazy stuff we've been through the last year.